So proud of rural Democrats for coming out to learn about the candidates, to learn about the issues, to learn what it is going to take for us to have a Democratic president in 2020. Anybody in for that one? So we got a good crowd here tonight. And, you know, I am not going to take a whole bunch of time, talking. I think Secretary Castro knows more about him than I know about him. So I would like to give a warm rural Nevada welcome to Secretary Julían Castro and our candidate for President of the United States.
I love those adios Trump buttons that y'all have on. It's our most popular button. You can imagine why. First of all, let me say a huge thank you, Kimmy, to you for the introduction, but also for, of course, your leadership here in rural Nevada. It's great to be here in Minden. And you have folks from throughout the state. I want to give a big shout out and thank Allison for her leadership, for her support, for inspiring so many people through her activism, and really have appreciated your support, and your voice is so well respected throughout the state. It means a lot that you're here tonight. And to Megan for the great work that she's doing on behalf of the campaign out here. A fellow San Antonian. I hope that y'all won't hold it against her that she is from Texas, because Texans are everywhere these days. But it's good to be able to work with you, and thank you for using your voice and your talent on behalf of our campaign. I really appreciate it. And I want to thank each and every one of you. Yesterday, and I don't know if some of y'all were there at the First in the West dinner. Was anybody there last night? No? Because I know some people were traveling back and forth and so, oh, one person. Okay, a couple of folks. So last night we had the First in the West dinner in Las Vegas, which was fantastic. They did a tribute to Majority Leader Reid, and 14 presidential candidates got on stage to congratulate him on his fantastic career. And they had a video right before that of the wonderful work that he had done on behalf of Nevadans, getting the caucus here to be number 3, the third state to vote, I guess before the 2008 cycle, and legislation that he'd worked on. It was a wonderful evening, but for me, the thing that is most special is that for those of us that are traveling around the country right now, we get to point out the wonderful progress that Nevada has made toward being a blue state. Yes. And the fact that more than that, I mean, y'all have a lot to be thankful, be happy about, thankful for in terms of the changes in this state. The first female majority legislature, female senators that are spectacular. I mean, so much to be proud of. I think the thing to be most proud of, though, is that that's actually turning into great legislation that's touching people's lives. And when I travel to other states, I say, look at what has happened in Nevada, that it actually makes a difference when you get a Democratic governor, when you get 2 senators, and you have that kind of legislative majority where you can get things done. And as we think about 2020, I wanted to come here tonight and talk to you about the vision that I have and that I think a lot of us share for the years ahead. I'm convinced that on January 20th, 2021, at 12:01 p.m., we're going to have a Democratic president, a Democratic House, and a Democratic Senate. Doesn't that sound like music to everybody here? That's like music to my ears. Right? In other words, there's going to be life after Donald Trump. There's going to be life. Imagine that moment when he's no longer the president. Doesn't that make everybody feel happy, a little bit lighter? Right? But we know that, so we know the real question is, what are we going to do after Donald Trump? Right? We got to fight right now. And there's a fight on our hands in Washington. My brother, I have a twin brother, Joaquin. Some of y'all may have seen him on TV recently because he's on the Intelligence Committee, which is basically serving as the committee that is presiding over these impeachment hearings. And he's the bearded one these days. That's how you can tell us apart. I swear, on Twitter all the time, you know, my brother will be asking his questions with his 5 minutes that they get, and every single time, people on Twitter will tweet, "Oh, there's Julían Castro." I feel like telling him all the time, "That's not me." He grew a beard so that people could tell us apart. He did, he really did. He always says the way to tell us apart is that I'm 1 minute uglier than he is. You'll have to judge for yourself with that beard of his. I don't know. But look, they're focused on that. They're focused on impeachment. And I believe this president deserves to be impeached and removed from office. And I said that as soon as the Mueller report came out. I was the first candidate, in fact, that day to say that. And I hope that that happens. Now, you know, I have my doubts whether Mitch McConnell and his Republican buddies are ever going to do that. They should, but I don't have confidence they're going to do the right thing. But, you know, we know what the problems are with this president and how bad he is. We have to offer something different. We have to offer a strong, compelling, positive vision for the future of our country. And I think that I believe what folks are looking for in 2020 is somebody with the right experience to be president, somebody with a good vision for the future of the country, and also, very importantly, somebody that can beat Donald Trump, because we got to beat Donald Trump in November of 2020. I served as mayor of San Antonio, the 7th largest city in the United States. Hopefully some of y'all have been there to the Riverwalk, the Alamo. We got the Spurs, although the Spurs aren't quite doing as well these days. You know, San Antonio is a city now of almost 1.5 million people.
Really?
The 7th largest city in the country. I served on the city council for 4 years and then lost a close mayor's race and then served as mayor for 5 years until I got a phone call in April of 2014, I think it was April 16th of 2014, from President Obama. And I had just driven through the drive-thru at Panda Express. Oh my God. Looked at the phone. You know how it says unknown, block call, it said private. And picked up the phone, and it was President Obama, and ended up serving as his housing secretary for the last 2.5 years of the administration. And so I'm one of the few candidates that has strong executive experience of serving as the mayor of a large city, of managing a department that had 8,000 employees, a $48 billion budget, offices across the country, a track record of getting things done. And my vision for the future of our country is that we work together to get smarter, to get healthier, to be a fairer country, and to ensure that all of us are more prosperous. When I served as mayor of San Antonio, the proudest thing during my tenure that we did, the thing I'm most proud of, is that we asked the voters to pass a 1/8 cent sales tax increase to significantly expand high-quality full-day pre-K for our 4-year-olds. Because we recognized that the biggest obstacle to success for that community was the fact that it had a lower educational achievement rate than most big cities. And the jobs require more knowledge and more skill than ever before. You can imagine we're in Texas, and so anytime you say the word tax, everybody gets very, very nervous. But we sold it. We said, look, on average, the average San Antonian is going to have to pay $7.81 more in sales tax a year. And for that, over the course of the next 8 years, 22,000 4-year-olds are going to get excellent, high-quality full-day pre-K. Because of that, San Antonio has one of the best pre-K programs in all of the country. We also opened up something called Cafe College, which was this one-stop center in downtown San Antonio where anybody, whether you're, you know, at a public school, private school, homeschooled, anybody could go and get free admissions and financial aid advice. Because we found that the ratio of students to counselors in our high schools was 420 students to 1 counselor. So this idea, and I'm sure some of y'all are dealing with this as parents or grandparents of kids that are looking at college, the idea today that these students get this sagacious advice for 2 hours from their counselor It just doesn't happen, right? But we wanted to put the building blocks in place for that community so that people could succeed, so that they could achieve their dreams. I got into public service in the first place because I felt tremendously blessed to have achieved my dreams. And education was a key to that. My brother and I are products of the public schools of San Antonio. My father was a teacher for 31 years. I grew up with my mother and my grandmother. My grandmother had come over from Mexico when she was 7 years old. She was an orphan with her little sister. She worked as a maid, a cook, and a babysitter. She got yanked out of school when she was in elementary, so she never really got a formal education. Raised my mom as a single parent. My mom raised the two of us, Joaquin and me, as a single parent. Castro was actually my mother's name and my grandmother's name. These strong women raised the two of us. And education was the whole key to how I was able to eventually go to Stanford and go to Harvard Law School with my brother, because I can't get rid of him. And become the first, I really can. But we became the first in our family to become professionals as attorneys and then get to serve our communities in public service and serve the nation. And to me, it's amazing to think that just 2 generations after my grandmother got to the United States, like I bet a lot of your relatives did, wherever you came from, with almost nothing. She only had 2 grandchildren. And one of her grandsons is the congressman representing that area, that neighborhood that she came to. And the other one is running for president of the United States.
Amazing.
That is the American. So I want to make sure that we invest in education. I've proposed a plan that would improve K-12 education in a number of ways by paying teachers what they deserve, with a refundable teacher's tax credit, by investing in the infrastructure of schools and materials that students need, by fully funding the IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Also, by expanding higher education opportunity, right? Making public state universities, community colleges, and job training and certification programs tuition free.
Oh, wow.
There are folks in this room that will remember that there was a time when that was common in a lot of state systems. So this is not radical. This is not something that the United States has never done. A lot of state systems used to do that. On top of that, I believe that we need to reinvest in trade education in our high schools, which we also used to do, to ensure that for folks who choose a different path, maybe they're not going to go into higher education right away or ever, but that they have the opportunity to get a skill so that they can get gainful employment. So we need to invest in education to get smarter. We also need to get healthier. I believe that we need to base our healthcare system off of Medicare, but also allow for folks to opt out if they want, if they have a strong, solid private health insurance plan, that we can do both of those things. The grandmother that I grew up with, she had diabetes. And I watched as she got older and older, and her condition got worse and worse. But that whole time, she had Medicare. So I want to strengthen it for the people who are on it, and for Medicare to become the default health care that people receive. Because I think in our country that too oftentimes the difference between health care and health insurance is that health insurance is the letter that you get telling you the 2 or 3 reasons why you're not going to get care.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I very much agree with Senator Sanders and Senator Warren on is that there are times when people think that they have private health insurance and they think that health insurance is good, and then they actually have to use it.
Yeah.
And it turns out that it's not as good, not nearly as good as they thought.
Yep.
So I believe in a Medicare-based system with an opt-out for private health insurance, as long as it meets certain benchmarks, that we know it's good insurance, so that it's not going to fail you when you really need it. But it still gives people a choice if they want that. It's also time to make sure that for rural communities in our country, we do something about the fact that too many rural hospitals are closing. In my home state of Texas, and I'm sure you don't see that here in Nevada, right? People have to drive 100 miles or more than that to get decent care. In my home state of Texas, something like 15 or 16 rural hospitals have closed over the last decade or so. In Iowa, that you can imagine we're spending a lot of time in these days, something like 7 or 8. Here in Nevada, I know that some have also had problems. Or if they don't close altogether, they've closed their inpatient psychiatric units or OBGYN units. We also need to make sure that we end this distinction between physical health care and mental health care and invest in mental health care. Because that can be every bit as debilitating as a physical ailment. And finally, we need to make sure that people can afford their prescription drugs. In my neck of the woods of Texas, people have to go to Mexico to go get drugs. My grandmother, she relied on insulin, and for any of y'all that have family members that are diabetic, or if you're diabetic, you know that's very common. Why in the world is it that insulin costs 10 times as much in the United States as it does in Canada? That's a crime. And you remember that EpiPen?
Yes.
That they jacked up the
Yes.
price, they just kept jacking up the price because they can. We need to allow for the importation of drugs from other countries that do a good vetting process like Canada and allow them into the United States. We need to do patent reform so that these companies can't just keep re-upping their patents and keep drugs that should go on the generic market off of that generic market, right? We need to hold these executives accountable for playing with these prices and ultimately ensure that people can afford their medication. So we need to get healthier. We also need to get fairer. Like, I grew up with a single mom, and I'll tell you a quick story. When my mom was 38, and I think my brother and I were about 11, my mom suddenly lost all her hair. She went bald. She grew it back, don't worry. There's a good ending to the story. And my mom is still with us, she's 72. But you can imagine that freaked me out when I was 11 years old, and my brother too. Like, we didn't know what in the world was going on. She started to lose her hair, and ultimately the doctors told her that they chalked it up to stress.
Oh, no kidding.
Y'all know that there are a lot of families out there, maybe families here, that people are stressed out, they're working hard. They're doing what, at that time she was doing what she could as a single mom to support my brother and me, and also my mom, or my grandmother, her mom that lived in the house with us. Right? And so it is inexcusable that in the year 2019 that women get paid on average 80 cents of what a man makes. I want equal pay for equal work in this country. And I also want to make sure that your sexual orientation or your gender identity never determines how you're treated in this country. And I have a track record of work on this. When I was mayor of San Antonio, we passed a sweeping non-discrimination ordinance that covered the entire LGBTQ community. Before marriage equality, we passed domestic partnership benefits. And then when I got to HUD and I was HUD secretary, we expanded something called the Equal Access Rule to make sure that transgender individuals, if they went to a shelter, for instance, that was publicly funded, that they would be accommodated according to their preference, to how they felt comfortable. And we worked on making sure that we could address the high rate of homelessness among LGBTQ teens. In some communities, up to 40% of homeless teenagers come from the LGBTQ community. So I've always said we want to make sure that we have no second-class citizens in the United States of America, that everybody is treated the same and that everybody has a shot at success. We also want to be fairer by reforming our criminal justice system. And I hope that y'all will check out the plan that I put forward that I call a first chance plan. And I call it a first chance plan because even though I want people to have an effective second chance in life if they've been incarcerated, and I lay out how, I want to make sure that people have a first chance in the first place. And too oftentimes, a lot of people are failed by our schools. They're failed by other things. And I want to make sure that whether you live in a rural area or an urban area, no matter what the color of your skin is, no matter how much money your folks have or don't have, that you can have a good first shot at success in our country. And I talk about some of the ways that we can invest in education, in job opportunities and other things so people can have that. And also that we can reform our laws and everything from police reform to judicial reform, sentencing reform, cash bail reform, so that we have a fairer society. And finally, I want to make sure that in the years to come that prosperity in our country means prosperity for everybody. I saw a couple of days ago that Bill Gates just overtook Jeff Bezos again to be the wealthiest person, I think, in the world, at least in the United States. He's worth $110 billion.
Isn't that amazing? Wow.
You know, we live in a country where we don't begrudge people their success. If people work hard and, you know, they're successful, then they are. You know, being worth $110 billion, I think that's a bit much. But how is it that we have folks now that are worth $110 billion, and we have people that are sleeping underneath the Las Vegas Strip in a storm drainage tunnel that I visited a few months ago?
Yeah.
How is it that Amazon didn't pay any federal income taxes when they made billions of dollars in profit, and you and your family have to write a check to the IRS every year? I want a tax code that actually rewards people who have to work for a living. Not just very wealthy corporations or wealthy individuals. People who have to work for a living. I also want to make sure that we tackle some of the biggest challenges ahead of us. One of the biggest mistakes that this administration has made is embracing climate denialism. We need to make sure that the first thing we do in office in January of 2021 is to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord and fight for climate change. Confront climate change. And I see it not only as a crisis, but also an opportunity. It's an opportunity to unleash millions of new jobs in the clean energy economy. A couple months back, I visited a place called TPI. They manufacture wind turbines. This place is in Newton, Iowa. And Newton, Iowa is a small town in Iowa. They used to have a Maytag washing machine manufacturing facility there. It employed 3,000 people, 3,000 jobs, and then it closed. Well, y'all can imagine what kind of a blow that is to a town when your main employer closes. Well, now TPI is there. They're manufacturing these long, huge wind turbines. I walked through the factory floor. And 1,000 people with good paying jobs, being able to provide for their family. We have seen that story in the solar energy industry, the wind energy industry, other clean energy, right, in Nevada, in Texas, in Iowa, in California, in a whole bunch of different states. That is the future. There's no reason that the United States should not lead when it comes to the new energy economy. We can do that. I also believe that we can do things like invest in housing that is affordable to everybody. We see out there in communities big and small that the rent is going through the roof, right? We also see in rural communities that a lot of times the housing stock is older. The need for housing exists everywhere, and I want to make sure that we meet it. I also want to make sure that in the years to come that we harness the potential of immigrants in our country. I've laid out a very different vision, a positive, strong vision for the future that maintains border security, but also treats people with common sense and compassion instead of cruelty. You know, no more kids in cages, no more separated families, no more playing games with people that are asylum. You know, as Democrats, you know, of course, you know, we believe in making sure that we remain both a nation of immigrants and of laws, right? But I think that we're repulsed by what this president has done to a whole bunch of children, some of whom still have not been reunited with their parents. You know, that does not speak to who we are or who we should be as a nation, and we need to change that. Maybe just say finally that I hope for those of y'all that have been tuning into this campaign, because I know that there are 17 campaigns now. At one time there were 25, so this seems like a small number now. But hey, I get it. Look, there's 17 different campaigns, right? I mean, people only have a limited amount of time. I know that as much as we like to think we're entertaining, you have better things to do than constantly follow what we're doing. But for those of y'all who have been following the campaign, I hope that you notice that we've marched to the beat of our own drum. That we've been different from just about every campaign. And that I've been speaking up for the most vulnerable people in our nation. Those folks living homeless in a storm drainage tunnel. I just went today to Yerington to visit with the Yerington Paiute tribe and the Walker River Paiute tribe, and to see the Anaconda copper mine that has contaminated the water supply there. They're drinking bottled water still. I went to Flint a few months back. I had been there as housing secretary, and I went back to talk to the residents of Flint about how they're doing. And then I didn't just talk, I released a plan on how we're going to make sure that lead is no longer a major public health threat in our country. I visited a Washington, D.C. jail to talk to people there who were incarcerated, who told me their opinions on how they think we can help ensure that people get an effective second chance in life and a first chance. I'm the only candidate that's put out a plan to improve and reimagine our foster care system, because we have too many people in foster care, too many children who end up in foster care in the first place, and then of the ones that end up in foster care, we have a lot of loving foster parents, but we need to help them out. We need to make sure that those children can do better than they have been doing. They're less likely to graduate, less likely to stay out of trouble. They often have a higher incarceration rate, right? A harder time getting onto a good path in life. And so, because what I believe is that as Democrats, we fight for the middle class. We should always fight for the middle class. We're going to continue to do that. We speak up for the middle class, and I have too. But somewhere along the way, in the last 30 or 40 years, we forgot to talk about the poor. We forgot to talk about the most downtrodden. We forgot to fight with the same intensity for the most vulnerable communities. This campaign has not forgotten that. And as long as I'm campaigning, I won't forget it. Whether they live in rural communities or they live in cities, no matter their background, all of us are part of an American family that are trying to make the nation better. And I look forward to the next 13 weeks before the Nevada caucus. I hope that I can get your support. We're going to be spending a lot of time here in Nevada. Y'all may have seen my comments recently about Iowa and New Hampshire. I was glad to see Senator Reid, make some supportive comments about the idea that we need to look at other states to be able to go first. I agree with him that Nevada, much more closely reflects the diversity of our country and of the Democratic Party. When I think of Nevada, and I said this last night, and I think of the people who are part of it, I think of the future of this country. The future of this country is both urban and rural. The future of this country is people working hard to achieve their dreams. The future of this country is not the division, the fighting that Donald Trump fosters, the bigotry that he tries to stoke. It's people trying to work together to get past differences and really to celebrate and appreciate those differences. And a country that will get stronger and stronger if all of us work together to create that vision for prosperity that I hope we share. So thank you all very much for having me.
Evening is, does anybody have some questions? Come on down.
This is when in the news the question is slightly loaded. But what should the U.S. policy be to counter China's Uyghur concentration camps?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. So y'all may have seen an article yesterday, I think it was yesterday and the day before in the New York Times that we put out there on social media, which was an astonishing article. For those of y'all who didn't see it, this was one of the rare times where somebody leaked to the American press documents, internal Chinese documents. These documents detailed the advice that the central government was giving to provincial governments on a specific provincial government on how to handle questions that returning college students would have about their parents and family members who had been taken, essentially these re-education camps or concentration camps, what I call them. These are Muslim Chinese, known as Uyghurs. And the question is, and so some people estimate that there are between 1 and 3 million people
Really?
that have been incarcerated. Yeah, I mean, it's the scale of it. Now, remember, China has a lot of people. But the scale of it is tremendous.
Breathtaking.
And it is a shame, it is a tragedy, it's horrific what they're doing to these people. I think it was in the third debate, in fact, I mentioned speaking up for the Uyghurs from the debate stage. So I think that the United States has a role to play in fighting for human rights. And that this president has dropped the ball because they have not pressed the case on human rights nearly enough. In fact, I would say at all. Every now and then, the administration, when they don't like a country, for convenient reasons, they bring up human rights. Have you all seen that? You know,
Yeah.
when they want to, when it's convenient for them, they bring up human rights. But they don't stand up to Saudi Arabia on human rights, don't stand up to Russia on human rights, won't stand up to China. So, you know, or North Korea, of course. So what I have said is that we need an American, well, trade policy and diplomatic policy that presses the case on human rights. In the case of China, that means working towards sanctions to pressure China
Wow.
to take action to release the Uyghurs. And, you know, I'm not under an impression, I'm not naive, I don't think that that's easy. But I do think that the United States has to start somewhere, and that we need to lead around the world in championing human rights. It also means, candidly, that we have to reevaluate some of the relationships that we have, like with Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Right? Remember, these relationships should not be set in stone, right? We have to ensure going forward that our trade policy, our diplomatic policy is more in line with our human rights values in the future.
So I got one if I could.
Yeah.
So, we're looking at this and, you know, on an almost daily basis, you know, there's a new tweet storm, something coming out. And I think about all the people I know that are part of any minority community. Democrats in rural Nevada are part of minority communities. And what we see is, I hear from the high school that kids are of different colors or different sexual orientation or whatever. These tweets come out and it just puts targets on their back.
Really?
Yeah.
So I would like to think that we elect a Democratic president, we would be a huge way towards resolving that issue. But the question that I have is as far as reversing or countering the narrative of what do we do until the next election? How do we approach that? It's a long time
Yeah, yeah.
until
Sure,
then,
sure.
for the people that are dealing with that, with the targets being put on their back,
Sure.
just by tweet. It's crazy.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, this president, of course, is unlike any president that we've had before, and not only that, his bigotry and his division, you know, is matched by a 21st century technology that was not available to other leaders like that before. Maybe there were other leaders in the past that were as bad as this president in terms of how divisive he is, but they didn't have the same tools,
Yeah.
you know, specifically social media, to be able to broadcast that in the same way as constantly and as powerfully and not being filtered by anybody else and so forth. So the question is, what do we do about it? You know, that's why I believe that all of us need to use our voice to try and counter it. There's plenty that we can do about it with the next president, next administration. I mean, the next president, it's gonna be very easy to change the tone to not be that divisive, not be targeting people. In fact, trying to be lifting people up instead of targeting, and protecting them with new laws and with regulations. But in the meantime, you know, I think it's up to community members and all of us who are trying to be in public service or elected officials in their capacities as public servants to speak up. I mean, y'all have probably seen, you know, remember that What Would You Do, that series on
Yes.
ABC, right? Like where there's some scenario and they're seeing what people would do, they walk into it. Yeah, some of them look very contrived and so forth, but I think the lesson there is that each of us has the power to change the dynamic when we speak up for what is right? In our own, in a community setting, in a space, in a meeting, in our neighborhood group, in any single way, we have our own power at school. Right? I know that I have a 10-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old son, and we try and teach our children the right values and to speak up when they can for those values, for their friends if they're being bullied. Right? So it's up to all of us. I don't think necessarily that the government can do that right now, between now and then. I think really it's up to all of us to combat that, to stand for something different, to speak up in a different way. And some of the most inspiring things that have happened since Donald Trump got elected were like the Women's March that happened right afterwards, right? The March for Our Lives, different expressions of a positive vision for the future of our country. We need to keep doing that all the time.
Thank you for that. Thank
Sure.
you. Appreciate it. Yeah.
All right.
We've got another question over here.
Yes, sir.
What do you think is your most radical proposal?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about different things. I talked about supporting Sheila Jackson Lee's, Congresswoman Jackson Lee's formulation of a commission to look at reparations for the descendants of slavery. I have also spoken about one that probably needs a little more explanation to folks. Getting rid of section 1325 of the Immigration and Nationality Act. Which a lot of people think means that some people, the Republicans say that means open borders. It does not. What it means is that instead of treating this as a criminal offense, we would treat it as a civil offense like we used to for 70 years.
Yeah.
And there's accountability in the system, but you're getting rid of the law that has allowed Trump or could allow a future administration to weaponize that misdemeanor crime to separate families. What else? I'm going through my catalog. I mean,
Those are two good ones.
let's be honest. One person's like radical ideas, another person's, you didn't go far enough. Let me just take one more, just to.
Police brutality.
Yeah, no, I've been very outspoken on police brutality. So,
Guns.
yeah, I mean, on police brutality, just to finish that thought, I have called for ending qualified immunity. Because, look, I worked with a lot of great police officers when I was mayor of San Antonio. I know that we have a lot of great police officers, but qualified immunity as a doctrine basically protects from civil lawsuits police officers and police officers who have engaged in excessive force. And I think there was a kernel of a good idea originally, but it's gone completely off the rails and protected ridiculous conduct that was clearly abusive, that was brutality. And I believe that we need to at least restrict it, if not end it. And so I've called for that as one of the parts of my police reform plan. That I think, what I want is, obviously I want effective policing, I want safe communities, but I also want that no matter who you are in this country, that when you see a police officer on the street, that you feel safer personally, and you feel like they're there to help you, which all of us should feel like, and most of them are. But that especially in communities of color, especially for young black men and women, we've seen too many of these videos where that's not the case. So those are 3 examples. All right.
How are you doing? You got time for another one?
Yeah, so I have a question. This isn't specific to Nevada. There are other states that have legalized marijuana too that have the same problem. And it's a cash-based business. And what we're starting to see throughout California and Nevada, Massachusetts, is public corruption associated with that because it's a cash-based business. So if you're a corrupt building official or you're a corrupt legislative aide, it's hard to track that. And my specific question is twofold. One, would you support legalizing marijuana nationally and allowing, even in states where it's illegal, it to be banked? Because I think that'd do a lot to clean up the corruption. And two, what would you do, not specifically to clean up the public corruption, because everybody believes that that's wrong, but there's two parts of it. The business corruption, the people who are paying corrupt elected officials to bribe. Because, I mean, if Donald Trump is corrupt, and the problem is it's corrupting from the top down, and it's really ruining some of our smaller communities.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Yes, I do believe that we should legalize marijuana federally. I believe that we have enough experience in states like Colorado and other states that have done so. And sometimes with hiccups that they've had to adjust their approach, right? But there's enough experience under our belt to do that in a reasonable, orderly way. And let me just say, you know, I did see Vice President Biden's comments suggesting that he would not do that because he sees marijuana as a gateway drug. I think there's, look, I don't even drink. I have never done marijuana.
Oh, goodness.
I don't even drink alcohol. At the same time, we have plenty of evidence from around the world and evidence now in the United States, in Colorado, in other states. I think here it's legalized now recreationally. We have plenty of evidence that you can regulate this so that you can do it in an orderly, safe way. And you do have to regulate it in a careful, safe way, but that can be done. And that would include the ability for people to get banked, to relieve the anxiety that these financial institutions have about, you know, banking somebody engaged in that business. I also believe that in our criminal justice system, a lot of young people have gotten caught up and have been put behind bars who, you know, really never should have ended up behind bars in the first place. And they could have had more productive lives, could have contributed more to society if we had legalized it a long time ago. So as president, that is something that I would support. All right?
So I think we had one more. Mark, you got one?
Yep.
Thank you. For over 40 years, workers in this country have seen their voice and their power minimalized by the enactment of anti-labor government policies.
Yeah.
And during that time, there's been no administration, Democratic or Republican, that has acted sufficiently to reverse these attacks on working people. Will you push Congress to enact the necessary reforms to the National Labor Relations Act and the Railway Labor Act to give workers their voice and their power back as a means of countervailing overwhelming corporate influence in politics, as well as addressing income inequality?
Thank you for the question. Yes, I will. And I support specifically the PRO Act in Congress to make it easier for workers to organize. And I support equivalent legislation for the public sector side. As you know, the PRO Act deals with the private sector side. For the public sector side that's a bit affected by that Janus Supreme Court decision, I believe we need to make it easier for people to organize and for them to see value, continued value in belonging to a union, so that we can protect workers from this growing inequality. And let me just say also, what's happening right now is that we have more and more employers that are kicking the status of people to independent contractor instead of employee. Right? They're also dropping people's hours down underneath 30 hours a week and calling you a part-time employee.
Yeah, right.
Gone are the pensions that people used to get.
Yeah.
Gone sometimes now are the 401k plans that people used to get. At the same time, you have the rise, and you know, this, admittedly, this is hitting urban areas right now more, but you have the rise of the gig economy, right? Uber and Lyft and other things, where they don't, you're an independent contractor, you're fending for yourself, no benefits. To me, what this speaks of is that the federal government has a stronger role to play in protecting workers, protecting employees, and also limiting the ability of companies to consider people independent contractors. You know, there are some instances where people will be independent contractors, but we need to curtail that so that people don't get kicked to the curb, basically. And I supported legislation in California to reform the law around who's an independent contractor and who's not. And I also support legislation that would protect the right of workers to organize and make it easier for workers to organize, including amending the pieces of legislation that you mentioned. All right. Yeah, maybe we'll take one more.
I just have a question. What are your views on Social Security? Because I've been reading lately, there's a lot of opinions that it's not gonna be around for the, you know, after 20 years. We've got a lot of boomers retiring.
Yeah,
We have
yeah.
a lot of young people who aren't joining the workforce as early or, you know, whatever. So what's your viewpoint on
Yeah.
Social Security?
Number one, it's that you earned it. This is not an entitlement program. People earn Social Security. It always gets me when these Republicans start talking about like they can just take down people's Social Security or play around with people's Social Security. I mean, that is something people earned, right? They should be able to get that. So as I see it, Social Security should never get weaker. It should only get stronger. There are estimates that in the 2030s, and you know, depending on which estimate you believe, from the late 2020s to the mid 2030s, that Social Security is going to be, you know, the Social Security Trust Fund is going to have a real problems. What do we do about that? I've suggested that we should look at increasing the payroll tax cap so that we draw more revenue into Social Security Trust Fund. To me, it doesn't make sense that we cap it right now where we do. I think we cap it, I want to say at $130,000.
or something.
Yeah. But we need to lift the cap so that we can generate more revenue. Now, let me connect the dots really quickly here also, because you mentioned this. It's true, right? Right now, we have a very low unemployment rate. At the same time, we have people that are leaving the workforce, lower workforce participation rate than we've had in a while. And we have a lot of baby boomers who are turning 65 or already did and drawing down at record numbers on Social Security Trust Fund without a matching number of, well, right now there is, but we're driving down toward a 1-to-1 ratio. Remember, we used to be like 10-to-1 or 8-to-1, and now the number of workers in the workforce is driving down compared to the people drawing down. So we need a young, healthy, vibrant workforce. I've made the point that this is one of the ways that we can have a win-win if we have an orderly, reasonable immigration system where you have immigrants that want to work hard, they want to be able to provide for their families. You have 10 to 11 million people that are already here that are undocumented, many of them living in the shadows, and others that want to come. You know, let's create the opportunity where we need it for people be able to come and work. We always want Americans first to have, you know, those jobs and opportunity. I agree with that. But at the same time, I think that with an immigration system that harnesses the potential of immigrants, you can add a young, healthy, vibrant cohort to that workforce and help ensure that there are more people that are contributing into the Social Security Trust Fund so that it's going to be solvent. And you know, our baby boomers and those like me and Generation X. Yeah, I see we have like, I have to say, my generation is not known for much, you know. You always hear about baby boomers, you hear about, you know, the millennials, and now you hear about that Generation Z. All right? We're not, yeah. Ted Cruz is a Gen X. Other than that. But that is one of the points that I've made consistently about Social Security, both about the payroll tax caps, that we need to lift them, and then also that we can have a win-win if we do immigration right as one component of making sure our Social Security Trust Fund is more solvent in the future. All right? Okay, y'all, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And, so, just very quickly, you know, I am not gonna be on the debate stage on Wednesday. Unfortunately, we missed the polling cut, but we're working hard to get onto the December debate stage. I hope that y'all will go to my website, and, you know, I think we're 13,000 contributors away from 200,000 contributors for the December debate. And then we're working hard to get the polling up to make that December debate. And I'm gonna keep working hard with a positive vision for the future of our country. Hope we can meet your support, all right? Thank you very much.